Hey, this is Notser, and today we're going to be talking about a proof of concept developer blog post by Wargaming. Sorry I didn't get this video out sooner, I've just been busy. But we're going to be discussing 3 topics that Wargaming is interested in improving and changing. And this is not something that's guaranteed to come into the game. This is, in fact, something that Wargaming is gauging the response on. So, the 3 topics: cruiser armor, high explosive penetration, and IFHE nerf. Now, unfortunately, people are framing it around IFHE, but it is really 3 topics because what Wargaming ultimately wants to do is they want IFHE to be a decision between penetration or fire. They want the cruiser armor scheme to fall into a more neat classification so that heavy lights and what I'm calling super lights all have their own strengths and weaknesses in the game frame. And then they are improving everyone's high explosive penetration, I think, to better facilitate this push towards IFHE being a choice, not a mandatory skill. So for the armor, what Wargaming is planning on doing is classifying ships into 3 types: heavy cruiser, light cruiser, super light cruiser for cruiser, sorry, not ships. And it's going off of your gun caliber. So if you have a gun caliber of 189 millimeters or above, you will receive a heavy cruiser classification. At tier 10, you will receive 30 millimeter armor in the midship. So any ship that doesn't meet the 30 millimeter threshold will be receiving a buff, and that includes the Des Moines and the Salem. Now, that's just a coincidence based on the conversation. We can very clearly see all of these heavy cruisers, 30 millimeters. Yoshino, 30 millimeters. We can also see the Moskva has, oh yeah, it has more than 30 millimeters. So pretty much all of the cruisers with 203 millimeter guns have at least 30 outside of the Des Moines and the Salem. So those are the ones that are getting this buff. And I purely believe it's just coincidence. Every heavy cruiser is being leveled up to a tankier status than the light cruisers and the super light cruisers. And then also at tier 10 for the light cruisers, they are also receiving a similar buff to 30 millimeters in the midship. This is to facilitate more active maneuvering and more usable armor. They really, based on this, they really don't like it that cruisers will just sit broadside, or they'll sit not taking advantage of their armor, in a way that is overlooking something that heavy cruisers should have and big cruisers should have. They should have the ability to stand up to pretty much all fire if they are played correctly. And increasing everyone's armor for heavy cruisers and light cruisers at tier 10 to 30 millimeters midship is going to facilitate that. 30 millimeters is enough to cause up to 429 millimeters to ricochet. So it pretty much means the Republic and then the 457s and the 460s will have overmatch potential, but everyone else will have to deal with the ricochet potential, which I like. So once again, tier 10, 30 millimeters midship, pretty much everything light cruiser outside of the Minotaur. The Minotaur is not a light cruiser in this classification. It's a super light. Will receive a buff to 30 millimeters. So the Worcester, the Des Moines, and the Salem. The super light cruisers, though, which will be 139, below 139, and the British light cruisers, they classify as super light too. They will be getting a cap of 16 millimeters midship. So for the Minotaur, there's no change. You might remember the old version included a 30 millimeter buff to Minotaur. This has been reclassified in this new version to be based on the gun caliber. And they just feel like the Minotaur is a super light anyway, and the Brits are. That I agree. But do you know what else has a small gun caliber and is at tier 10? This is receiving a massive nerf because it's being reclassified as a super light cruiser. So it's no longer going to get 30 millimeters. 30 millimeters is going to be reserved for the heavy cruisers and the light cruisers at tier 10. This is going to be nerfed to 16 millimeters. 16 millimeters is the maximum amount of armor that you can have midship as a super light or a British light cruiser. And because of that, I mean, that basically makes the Smolensk way easier to damage from any angle for any battleship. And also, even, heavy cruisers for that matter. So it's going to be a lot more vulnerable to damage. That is a significant change. This armor adjustment also encompasses tiers 9 and tier 8. They are not getting a 30 millimeter buff. They will be capped at 27 millimeters in the midship. So, their example is the San Luis getting up to 27. Obviously, it's 25 in game right now. The Neptune is this super light cruiser classification, but it already has 16 millimeters in the midship, so it has no reclassification. The Dmitry Donskoy is a heavy cruiser, is actually in this classification is a light cruiser because it's 180 millimeters. So it's receiving a buff to 27. I believe the Bayard might actually already have, yes, the Bayard has this identity already baked into it. It also has another identity baked into it, and we'll get to that in a short bit. But this is a very big change for all cruisers. This will mean that they will just effectively have more or less armor based on the type of guns they have. And for tiers 8, 9, and 10, it functions very cleanly. I have concerns, though, for the tier 6 and tier 7 adjustments being too much, but Wargaming has said that they are going to be testing that more. Now, other changes that are going to be happening, the tier 6 and tier 7 battleships will be getting a bow buff to 26 millimeters rather than 25. The reason it's 26 and not 25 is sort of the gun caliber differences. Certain ships will have the ability to pin and certain ships won't, and they just want to make sure that they have an established different tier that they're sitting at. And this is from the HE penetration buff. So let's go right into that. This is a big deal. This is one of the best things they could do for the game. So the long and short of it basically is everyone is getting 1 millimeter extra penetration on their HE shell. So that means that by default, something like the Daring, which normally would not have enough penetration to fully damage its outer hull itself, in this proposed version of the game, it would. Because how the game works right now is HE is less than the actual number that it eventually reaches. And the reason they did that is they just felt like it has enough penetration, but just enough, right? If it had equal penetration, it couldn't damage the armor, I guess. They're just getting rid of that classification. I verified this with them on the CC chat. Everyone's getting a 1 millimeter buff. And I think that's awesome. Daring will no longer need IFHE. The GK, the 128s, will have 32 millimeters of penetration baked in. This is a really big deal for a lot of ships because what it's going to do is it's going to make these IFHE mandatory builds, IFHE as a mandatory build will no longer exist. And that's what I was hoping they would do all along. If they could move IFHE away from being mandatory, then they could nerf it and make it into an actual choice. And that's exactly what they're doing. So, the highlight, the Daring, the Jutland, they don't need IFHE in this world. 127 millimeter guns get 21 millimeters of penetration. They can do full damage to that 21 millimeter sheet on the gearing, for instance. See, right now it's 20 millimeters, but with this new rule, it would be 21. So there's a lot of nice little tweaks that would just come from this. And finally, the elephant in the room, IFHE. IFHE, getting a nerf, is something that is necessary for the game. Because the game itself, it really, really needs the skill to not be so universally powerful for a very select number of ships. Namely, super small gun calibers, DDs and light cruisers. They benefit far too much from IFHE that the game can't sustain that kind of damage increase because it almost expects there to be more shatters. That's why the rate of fire is so high, and the fire chance is so high as well. So, in an extreme case, the Smolensk doesn't need to pin your ship to damage it completely because it can just set a fire every other shot. That is something that makes it to where, a lot of Smolensk builds don't even involve IFHE. I don't have it. So I think, honestly, the Smolensk, of all things, is showing us proof of concept that you do not need penetration and fire chance to be effective. And because of that, I think that is why this change is being brought up once again. We really need IFHE to be a choice. So right now it's not a choice. It's just 30% extra penetration. It takes 1 or 3 fire percentage based on your gun caliber. In the proposed IFHE version, tiers 8, 9, and 10 would still have 30 millimeters of penetration. Not 30 millimeters, 30% better penetration. 30 millimeters. But it would take away 50% of your fire. And what Wargaming has done by giving everyone a 1 millimeter base pin buff, they have allowed these ships enough penetration to cross all of the significant thresholds. The higher tier 152 to 155 is getting a pin classification buff. It's going from 1/6 pin to 1/5 of your pin, and obviously 1/5 of 152 is, I think, about 30.4-ish. 30.4 is enough penetration to penetrate that 30 millimeter armor that they've stuck on all of the heavy cruisers and the light cruisers in this proposed version of the game. So every ship gets better penetration. There is a smaller benefit, obviously, because IFHE is not clearing all of these different gaps. Light cruisers will get nearly 31 millimeters of penetration. So the only barrier that they have to cross is the bow and stern of the Battleship 32. Obviously, heavy cruisers already get that baked in. They don't even need to make that compromise. And then the super lights, if they want to get extra penetration, to cross some cruiser thresholds, they have to give up fire chance. 50%. I mean, if you look at my Worcester right now, it would drop it to basically 5%, 4.5. I don't have Demolition Expert. I would probably pick up Demolition Expert because I would feel like I need to. But that would be a huge sacrifice in fire chance, right? That's the choice you have to make. If you want the penetration, you must give up the fire. If you want the fire chance, that's fine. You just won't be able to pin certain sections of the ship. So to me, this is a perfect IFHE change, except for one thing. How are you going to ask someone to spend 4 points on a choice? It's a choice. It's not an enhancement. It's one or the other. If it's a one or the other, I really think it needs to be a 2 or a 3 point skill. At 4 points, you're basically asking people to spend 4 points and for it to have a downside. That's a significant downside. That's kind of why manual secondaries is kind of disappointing. It has a downside. You can only attack on one side of the ship, and if you are trying to take advantage of your secondary build, you're going to move forward, probably going to have more than one ship in range. Oh, but you can't do that, right? So let's not repeat the mistakes in the past and maybe reclassify IFHE as a cheaper skill. Maybe swap positions with something and buff it. I don't know. Maybe swap positions with Demolition Expert and get 3 or 4% on it. I don't know. I don't know. That's obviously just because they're fire related. It's not something that I would recommend. But all of these changes together really refine the gameplay, and it makes it very sound to me. It gives clear advantages to heavy cruisers, so they don't have to compromise. They don't get to get extra damage and still have all their fire chance with IFHE. They only cross like one insignificant threshold, like American battleship hull. I mean, who would have ever thought that IFHE would ever be helpful on heavy cruisers like that, Jeez. But the way it stands right now, IFHE is just not a healthy skill. It makes certain ships too good, and it really compromises other matchups. And it doesn't have a downside. 1% fire chance? I mean, we're seeing a lot of IFHE in competitive for DDs because all they want to do is fire at range. And yeah, you could do that. But it's not really the best way for the game to be played. You know, do we really want long-range DDs just farming cruiser for damage and getting everything they want out of the matchup when the reality is that they're kind of designed to have to put themselves closer? And if they're put themselves closer, well, they're more vulnerable to actual ships. Like, dealing with a menace like the French DDs from max range in Des Moines feels very helpless. So we need to make sure that all of these classifications remain in the right order of balance. And I think we've just lost that way, and we really need to reclassify. And I think the Smolensk getting a massive nerf to a super light armor is great. It shows us that if you have plenty of fire chance, it doesn't really matter if you can pin it up. And I think that's really good for the game, because now we can make this choice, which needed to be done a long time ago, but it needs to happen. IFHE needs to be penetration or fire, not both. So thanks for watching this. I hope that this clarified all three of the changes. They are very significant in different ways. Yes, it does mean that ships like the Des Moines, the Daring, the Jutland, the GK, they're getting buffs, straight buffs, because they're right at that pin threshold. And you know what? That's just how it's going to go. Every DD pretty much is getting a buff of 1 or 2 extra millimeters of penetration. Does that mean the gearing's getting like a global nerf? Yeah, kind of, because it's now every DD that it matches up against will have the chance to penetrate its 21 millimeter armor, which was an advantage in some matchups, but it's no longer going to matter. So does that mean that they're going to have to compensate the gearing with some minor buff, maybe lower it in the hull, in the water? Yeah, maybe that might be. Maybe that has to happen. But in order for the game to be the best version of itself, these changes need to happen. IFHE cannot be mandatory for the Daring, or for secondary battleships, or for light cruisers, just to do damage to like 50% of their matchups in most instances. Like, that should not be the case for IFHE. And I don't think that a cruiser should have a disadvantage because it's a heavy cruiser. I think that heavy cruisers, there's a reason they have a bigger gun caliber. It's better. It should be better in a lot of cruiser-on-cruiser action. One other thing that they're changing is they're going to be lowering the superstructure armor of a couple ships. I don't remember the tier. I want to say it was cruisers. I want to say it's cruisers at tier 10. So, something's going from maybe battleships. Maybe battleships at mid-tier is getting 19 to 16. Either way, it's a very insignificant portion of it, and I can obviously clarify it more when we get the test server. So the idea is they're going to test this on a dedicated test server, and we're going to see if this indeed ends up working out for the game or it makes it worse. I think it's going to make it better, just through my mind of playing the game. I do dream about playing the game, so yes, I think that this is exactly what the game needs to give some leverage to certain cruiser classes that have been, overlooked. And nerfing some that really shouldn't be as strong. Like, you can't have damage per minute, rate of fire, fire chance, penetration, shell velocity, and armor. That seems a little crazy. So now that the heavy cruisers are getting their armor and the super lights are losing their armor, I think the order of balance will come into play. So thanks, for things like the Bogami. It should be fine since it's a light and super light. They have basically the same gun caliber. They're not the super light cruiser. Its penetration is a little interesting. 155 versus 152. That's a very close break point, but both of them can pin the bow and stern of those tier 5 and tier 6 and tier 7 battleships again above. So once again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to check out more of my content, you can click the most recent or the most relevant uploads. You could also choose to subscribe to my channel. We do daily World War II videos, first impression, how-to, news, and review related. My North American recruit invite is on the screen. You can take advantage of that. I stream at twitch.tv/Notser. Thank you, have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you next time.